Okay, we're here with Paul and Mary Bland, also known as Mary Woronov and Paul Bartel. Welcome to the show. Would it be fair to describe Eating Raoul as, let me see, a ferociously funny black comedy about, if you'll excuse the expression, consumerism?
It would be fair, but it would leave some things out.
What am I leaving out?
Capitalism. You're leaving out a lot of violence, a lot of sex, which I didn't notice in the film. And what else? A lot of comedy.
Paul, what else are you satirizing in Eating Raoul besides consumerism?
Well, I'm not really setting out to satirize anything. The film is intended as an entertainment about a nice middle-class couple with a simple, classic American ideal to get their little country restaurant. If in the course of pursuing their ideal they become involved with murder and mayhem, that's also in a great American tradition.
Mm-hmm. You're both, in a sense, veterans of underground filmmaking or B movies. In your case, Paul, you are, I guess, what might be described as a graduate of the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking, and Mary, you are a veteran of the New York underground scene, having worked with Andy Warhol. How did those experiences translate into Eating Raoul? Did you try to add any of your pasts in this film?
I think the biggest way that those experiences translated into working for Roger, you learn to just get it done, no matter what happens, no matter how you only have one take or you only have a little bit of time. And you learn that all of that doesn't matter in the end. What can happen is something really good. So you don't mind the situation under which you work or anything like that. It doesn't upset you.
Well, Roger Corman is known for that, for getting things done very quickly and getting things done very cheaply. But I noticed in Eating Raoul that one of the motifs in the film is this glorification of the banal. You know, Paul and Mary Bland. They are bland. They live in an apartment that I just can't describe except, how would you describe it? A 50s deco apartment.
Well,
and that reminded me very much of what Warhol was trying to do, to glorify the banal, to take...
Yes, but Warhol glorified the banal so much that he forgot to be entertaining, whereas we're very entertaining.
True. Paul?
When we started shooting the first 10 minutes of Eating Raoul, which was really a test piece that we hoped to use to raise money, which subsequently we failed to do. But at the time, we were looking around for an apartment to shoot in. We wanted some sort of interestingly eccentric background for Paul and Mary, but we didn't know exactly what it was to be. In the script, it describes a very bland apartment, as boring as the Bland's personality, in a sense. But Dick Blackburn, who is the author of the script and also the associate producer, had a friend named Art Fine who had an apartment that was full of this 50s furniture. And he suggested that maybe Art would loan us the apartment, because the building in which the apartment was going to be torn down in a few months. And it seemed likely that Art wouldn't care if we put a couple of holes in the wall or fastening lights, those things that inevitably happen to any apartment in which a film is being shot. When I saw the apartment with this 50s furniture and the 50s decor, it occurred to me that this was a perfect visual metaphor for the idea that the Blands are stuck in the 50s, both emotionally, socially, sexually, all their attitudes and whatnot are out of date. So it seemed perfect, and that's the reason we used that.
But you are not satirizing the Blands in the film. In a sense, you're satirizing everyone else.
Well, the Blands as much as everyone else.
The Blands as everybody else.
The Blands
as that attitude
are criminally insane.
Yes, but they throw all of the modern people, all of the people who I think are more realistic in the way they are portrayed, into sharper relief.
I don't.
No?
I think that the other people, I mean the swingers and things like that, I don't really think that they're realistically portrayed. Those are swingers as the Blands see them. you know, creepy people who have yek sex, and they're not. I mean,
I agree with Mary that the swingers are caricatured,
Yeah.
whereas the directorial intent was to make Paul and Mary lower key, more naturalistic, more reasonable, to play against their outrageous madness, their assumption that because these people are overtly sexual, they are therefore not nice, ergo, it's all right to murder them.
yeah. As long as you do it cleanly and neatly and get them all in a garbage bag.
Yes, we should point out that all of the murders in the film are done very cleanly and very neatly. There is very little in the way of graphic violence in Eating Raoul.
That's done on the one hand in order not to offend the audience with gore, and on the other hand to show from Paul and Mary's point of view that this violence is finessed, is essentially euphemized away for them. It's like the violence in cartoons. We bop them on the head and get rid of them. We don't see the blood. Surely there would be lots of blood and horrible screams of pain and agony, but none of that exists to the Blands.
What we make fun of is the moral attitude of the 50s, where it's wonderful if you're like Rock Hudson and Doris Day and you sleep in twin beds and you have matching pajamas, but you don't have sex. And this is how they've been brought up. They followed that strictly. I mean, Paul and Mary don't.
Paul and Mary were taught that nice people sleep in twin beds with 1 foot on the floor.
That was the old rule, right? 1 foot had to be on the floor.
Yes, when you were shooting a
dormitory
bedroom
rule.
scene, 1 foot of each actor had to be on the floor on the opposite side of the bed.
How did you raise enough money to make such a bizarre, although hysterically funny, film?
I spent all the money that I'd saved from the profits of Cannonball, my last film, and then my parents gave me the money they got from selling their house, our old family house in Montclair, New Jersey, plus the money that my mother had in the stock market.
And how much did Eating Raoul cost to make?
About $500,000.
It's all up there on the screen, folks. Looks wonderful. At the press conference at the film festival, you indicated that 2 of your influences in making Eating Raoul were Kind Hearts and Coronets and The Lady Killers. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, those are both English comedies of the 50s, and in both of them, the audience is made to identify with a central character who is committing murders. In The Lady Killers, the central characters are a group of bank robbers, and actually they are trying to commit a murder and never succeed in doing it. There's a bumbling old lady who's in their way. However, in Kind Hearts and Coronets, there is an aggressed against young man whose ambition is to get to win a coronet. He wants to inherit, I forget what the title is, but he's trying to inherit a title, and there are 6 or 7 relatives between him and the title.
It's Alec Guinness playing all the roles, as I recall.
All the victims.
Mm-hmm. All the victims.
An old suffragette, an old retired general, all sorts of peculiar characters, and each of the murders is amusing and inventive, but your identification is with the murderer. And that's what I wanted. I wanted people to identify with Paul and Mary and find themselves cheering for Paul and Mary in their campaign to get this country restaurant.
Cheering with Paul and Mary also because they suffer things that other people suffer. Their credit card has been stopped.
Someone has thrown up on their card.
Yes, I mean, you know, their landlord has just increased their rent. They lost their job. They have all these. They don't deal with any of these frustrations. They swallow it and they swallow it and they swallow it, and then finally they murder someone.
How did you cast the film?
Mostly from friends. Except for 2 or 3 actors, but including the crucial role of Raoul. There were only 2 or 3 people that I didn't know or hadn't known before we started shooting. We had a hard time casting Raoul. We interviewed a lot of different actors, and finally I called the Mark Taper Forum, which had just put together the cast for the film of Zoot Suit. Mm-hmm. And when we described the role that we were trying to cast, a young, attractive, sexy, funny Chicano, the guy said, well, there's really only one. And it was Robert Beltran, and he was right.
He is a graduate of Luis Valdez Teatro Campesino, correct?
And he also has 3 years at RADA. Or was it 2?
I think it was 1.
Perhaps it was 6 months. He visited RADA.
Yes.
Well, he knows where RADA is.
I think so.
Whose original idea was the script?
Well, it was my idea to do a story in which Mary and I could play the leads. We'd done rock and roll high school together as actors, and after that, I thought it would be interesting to see if our personalities could support a whole feature film.
However, nobody else thought it was interesting.
No, we couldn't get a penny to pursue such a project. So, on a wing and a prayer, I talked my friend Dick Blackburn into collaborating with me on a story. We sat at Schwab's and came up with virtually the whole story, including the title, Eating Raoul. Then I was able to lure him with a free trip to Europe when I was on the jury of the Berlin Film Festival, and a little bit of money, and he wrote the first draft of the script, and then I wrote the second draft, and we...
Were you at all concerned that you would have a problem both starring and directing?
No, I thought that it would be much easier than it in fact turned out to be. It's something that I would not undertake to do again. In fact, Dick helped a great deal in the direction of those scenes that I was in, standing behind the camera and giving me advice and whatnot.
Mary, what's it like working with a director with whom you've become very friendly? Is it more professional, less professional? Is it just awkward? What?
It's great. Really is. Also, I mean, Paul, because he knows me, I mean, there are just a lot of things that you don't have to explain. There's a lot of meeting that you don't have to do and everything like that. And we just sort of understood each other.
A little bit about your backgrounds. Paul, you've already said that your family is from Montclair, New Jersey. I noticed that you were born in New Jersey. Have you lived there, or were you raised there?
Yes, through high school. Then I went to UCLA. Went away to California to college because they had a good film school, and particularly a good animation department. At that time, I thought I wanted to direct animated cartoons. And then gradually I realized that the life of an animator is fairly...
Boring.
Well, no, not boring, but private, isolated. It isn't a terribly social life. And the possibilities of the animated cartoon seem to be closing down rather than opening up. They got so expensive to make, and the really good, interesting ones really found no way of being distributed. The market was really in television, and the kind of stuff television was turning out was so appalling. So I sort of lost interest in animation and gravitated towards acting and playwriting and ultimately live-action filmmaking.
At what point in your career did you co-write the script for Cornucopia Sexualis?
It was after I had stopped making documentaries while I was trying to get involved in a feature project of my own. I had met Brian De Palma when a half-hour featurette of mine had opened theatrically with an hour short feature of his.
Was that Naughty Nurse?
No, it was, my film was The Secret Cinema. Brian's was Murder a la Mode. And the guy who had produced subsequent films of Brian's, Greetings and Hi Mom, named Chuck Hirsch, wanted to try his hand at directing. And since he and I were friends, I helped him get the production together and worked on the script with him and played a central role in the film. It was a softcore porno film. And our title was Yes, Joe, I never told you about this, but I have a checkered past. Cornucopia Sexualis was the our title, but the release title, the distributor called it Does Size Really Count? In this film, I played a demented psychiatrist who runs a group therapy session, and each of the members of my group tells the story of the experience that led to his or her sexual dysfunction.
It sounds like perfect training for Eating Raoul, but continue.
The climax of the film is a member of the group who is completely paralyzed and unable to speak. So her sexual adventure, which has been pieced together by our researchers, is acted out in front of her by other members of the group in the hope that the shock of seeing it reproduced will cure her, but instead she falls over dead. And there's a little epilogue in which I'm viewed in prison, soliciting funds for my lawyer and in order to carry on with my experimental psychiatric work.
Where can this little gem be found today?
I have no idea. I haven't seen it in years and years and years. It was kind of funny, but I wish I had a print of it. It'd be great to show at parties.
When did you become involved with Roger Corman and New World Pictures?
Well, shortly after doing Cornucopia Sexualis, Chuck Hirsch, who had directed it, brought me a script called Blood Relations, which had been written, by coincidence, by two guys with whom I'd gone to college, UCLA, that I hadn't seen for years. And it was very interesting. I thought it had possibilities. I optioned it from them. I rewrote it. And then my agent sold it to Roger Corman's brother, Gene Corman, who came to New York, screened my shorts, read the script, and agreed to produce it and let me direct it. So I went out to Los Angeles again and started work on it, and Gene had his offices then at New World, so I was around Roger a lot, although for the first few months he looked right through me as if I were invisible. But gradually we got to know each other, and he was rather interested in private parts. In fact, when it was finished, the guy who was his sales manager then of New World, Frank Moreno, suggested to Roger that since MGM didn't seem to know what to do with private parts, that he, Roger, buy it away from them and distribute it through New World. But MGM, having gone through several financial manipulations on the picture, was not interested in selling it.
Private Parts is another one of those films that you hear about but seldom see. What happened to that film? Was it held up in distribution, or? Well,
it was distributed, but there was a massive miscalculation about the title, which I opposed from the very beginning. In fact, when they told me they were going to call it Private Parts, I said, why don't we just call it Cocks and Cunts? You know, be upfront about it. They said, no, Private Parts is ambiguous, and besides, when people see that it's an MGM picture, they'll know it can't be, and it's only R-rated after all. So, you know. But in fact, a lot of big papers refused to print the title Private Parts, MGM or no, R rating or no. And in Boston it was Private Arts, in Chicago it was Private
Parties.
So it had a hard time, plus MGM made things easier by taking their name off it. After a sneak preview they arranged, if they had previewed it with Pinocchio and Bambi, they couldn't have been further off. They chose two PG horror films to which parents brought their children and sneaked this sophisticated, kinky horror film. There was a mass exodus of mothers dragging little children as soon as the scene in which the transsexual makes love to the water-filled transparent doll with the hypodermic full of blood. I won't go into the details.
As I said, I've read a lot about it. I know about that scene.
Anyway, this didn't please Mommy and Daddy, and they didn't want Junior and Sis to see it. And they wrote some very vitriolic cards in which they accused MGM of having betrayed its heritage and distributing porno, and the sales department at MGM pulled their name off it, pulled the line off it. It went out as a premiere production, and it went immediately, in the parlance, into the toilet.
But you were able to parlay that experience into a second feature film.
2 years of penury is what I parlayed that experience into.
Well, then how did Death Race 2000 come about?
I crawled the length of Sunset Boulevard up to Roger's desk on my hands and knees and begged to be forgiven for my indiscretion of having worked for his brother and made this awful picture.
I've heard that doesn't work with Roger Corman.
Well,
He also said he worked for nothing. That works.
yes,
That works.
that was the bottom line. He gave me a second unit to do. It was the second unit for Big Bad Mama, Steve Carver's picture. And the second unit consisted largely of car chases and car stunts, people falling out of cars, cars turning over, cars exploding. And somehow Roger got the idea, the false impression that I was interested in cars, knew about cars, was a car expert, and based simply on this incorrect impression offered me Death Race 2000, which took a year to finally get in the can. We went through a lot of different writers and a lot of different scripts, and Roger would despair and abandon the project and then reinstate it when some actor showed some interest in it.
But what you ended up with is a wonderful film that people flock around television sets to watch when it's on cable television. It's one of those films that has been rediscovered.
Roger felt that I ruined it and has always felt betrayed by me. He felt that I took what was a strong, hard action-adventure film and made it silly and debased it by putting silly comedy in it.
Roger himself
never
tore it
forgiven me.
apart and put blood in it.
Was it at that time that you first met Mary, or?
No, I'd known Mary for
No, I
a
knew
long
Paul
time.
when he did Secret Cinema, a film that I saw and loved because it was so paranoid and so New York. And
But Death Race was the first time we actually got to work together.
He called me up and he said, if you pay your own way out here, all the way to L.A., I think I can get you in this movie. And I said, yeah, sure, because I'd just done a soap and I was like really, my gills were collapsing. So I came out and I did that.